state in the nation. I don't know if everyone knew that. And so many of the patients and families I work with have left organized religion, but are still very spiritual, but they might have not have been exploring their spirituality, and then suddenly they get a terminal diagnosis or a sudden, loss of health, and suddenly they're on hospice, and all of these questions are coming up. And it's, I think someone compared it to whitewater rafting in slow motion. There's so much to explore, so many stories to be told, so much healing that wants to happen. And sometimes it happens in a very compressed time, like maybe a week or 2 weeks, all of this happens. And usually by the time someone passes, they're at peace and not afraid, but that's certainly not true at the beginning. And so I'm writing this book in the hopes that people will read it way before that time comes and sort of come to a place of peace. Because the other thing that is true in this country is that 92% of people in America believe that there's some kind of life after death. So we're a very spiritual country, but we're in great transition as far as our allegiances or where we get our spiritual support. And I think that being able to explore that really sets people free in those last few weeks. And I think for me, writing Memoir has set me free as well. I started out writing this book as more of a self-help book, and joined Brenda's class and brought one of my first drafts of a chapter to the class, and I was a journalist before I was a social worker, and there were some other recovering journalists in the group who liked what I had read but said, there's something missing in this story, and what's missing is you. And I hadn't valued my life enough, or even really explored it enough, to include it as a big piece of the book, and then turn the book actually into a memoir. So that's been really transformative for me as I've been exploring, well, how did I come to be interested in working with people who are dying? And discovered just a few months ago that it started when I was 6, when my mother took me to an unwrapping of a mummy at a museum, and I was just so fascinated and felt such a spiritual awakening during that I realized, oh, that's where it started. And I've continued having this interest in exploring the veil between the two worlds that people in hospice see on an everyday basis. And I want to sort of bring that experience to everyone who reads the book. If anyone here has been with someone at end of life, you probably have felt there's almost like a supernatural force field that descends, and you feel a sense of grace and a feeling of not being alone in the experience. And it's life-changing. It has been for me, and I know it is for other people as well. So I'm hoping to capture that in the book. And what I've had to do is be more vulnerable in my writing, because I'm not writing as a journalist. And that's a little bit scary, but also it's more fun to write with an arc that includes my own life. And I have the support of a group, which I think is critical, because I think writing memoir, we can't do it alone. It's just too hard. There's just so much natural fear and resistance that comes up every single time I sit down to write. It's there. And I've come to view it as kind of like the dragon that lives in the cave, right where I'm writing. And I have to sort of, every time I write, I have to go make friends with that dragon all over again and say, okay, there's the fear that's manifesting as some resistance or maybe some avoidance, but I'm gonna make friends with the dragon again, and I'm gonna sit down and write again today. And every single time I write, I have to do that. So I think it's really important to find a group, a carefully selected group of people that you trust, or a writing group, because I honestly think it's really difficult to write that deeply and that personally without some kind of support around you.
Great. Like Susan, I am also a recovering journalist. My name is Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. And as a journalist, it's verboten to show up on the page. You write about what you're observing, and boy, if you got to turtleize, that's even a stretch. So finding myself on the page is definitely a work in progress. And I also want to echo your recommendation of finding a reader who is nurturing and supportive, because you need some safety to do this. Being a reporter, I'm fascinated by certain subjects, and one is this Detroit-born saxophonist who spent a lot of time in Seattle and was really a civil rights leader in a very white city. And the class I kept writing this, and the class kept saying, why are you writing this story? And that was the hard question. And so I'm still sitting with that question, and why am I writing this? Why is this subject so fascinating for me? And Memoir is starting to open that door a little bit. And I think that it's really important to have people ask you these tough questions that you don't have answers to. And like Brenda was saying, you're transformed by writing this memoir. I'm going to be a different person when I go through this unknown. And I have to say, one of the things I was doing as a musician was I'm very fascinated by writing about regional history, and then using that as a springboard for writing new music that is inspired by scenes that are true and in history. And so I was doing a program about the Panama Hotel in Seattle. If you don't know, the Panama Hotel was built in 1910 by a Japanese architect. It's right in the center of Japantown. And belongings that were left when Japanese Americans were interned are still unclaimed in the basement. And the current owner has promised the former Japanese owner she would not change it. But she did cut a piece of the floor away and put plexiglass, and you could see these objects, a fishing pole, a piece of clothing fur, and a suitcase. And so I tell this story because as I was researching the history of that building, I was reading lots of Japanese American memoirs. They were all fascinating in all of the historical detail that they provided. But I came across this one that was so full of vivid scenes and emotions and how this person was feeling that was not present in any of the other memoirs. And I said, wow, this is fantastic. And there was a scene on Vashon Island when the FBI had just come to a neighbor of the memoirs and said, the FBI was here, get ready, they're coming. You might want to get rid of all the things that are Japanese in your household. And so she collects her dolls, her family collects her records of Japanese music, they get photographs of family, and one by one, they acknowledge these things and are very reverential to them, and then burn them in their stove. And yeah, I couldn't believe that scene. So I included that excerpt of that scene in this program because it was so touching. And then when I had to ask permission to use that in the program, and the publisher sent me to the memoirist, Mary Matsuda Grunewald, and she came to one of the performances and actually read that scene for the audience, and I was really touched. And then after the performance, she was 87 at the time, now she's 89, and she needed a ride home, and I found out that she was in my neighborhood. So I gave her a ride home, and I'm saying, Mary, how did you write that when all these other people could not write like that? And she said, oh, I had this wonderful writing teacher, Brenda Peterson, and this wonderful writing group. And so, yeah, and so that scene that was so rich, it turns out I started to hear the history of that scene. I think she wrote to the group, it was a very facts on file, much like the other memoirs. Oh, and one night I burned all my dolls. And
one sentence.
One sentence. And the group said, whoa! wait a minute. So Brenda assigned homework, okay, you have to go back to the International District this week, find that doll that was your favorite doll, put it on your writing desk. And so Mary came back the next week and said, okay, my homework was to cry. And so, but I think her getting in touch with that emotion and that exercise of really reliving it from a distance was just, it showed up on the page, and it's very moving. And so I just have to say that in this book, Mary has distilled with Sarah Jane all of this teaching that works, and it creates this incredible memoir and story that is rich and applicable to everyone who reads it. You learn things from it. You become the memoirist. You realize you're just like this person who wrote this story. And so I'm struggling to show up on the page, and my assignment for this week is to, I bought, so I'm trying to write this biography of this African-American jazz musician, very distant from my upbringing. So I read Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. Has anyone read that? I mean, Malcolm Gladwell can find these interesting case stories and then kind of weave all these things through. And he was trying to, the main point of the book is turning disadvantage into advantage. And so I started looking at my life. Where have I been chafed? Where have I been challenged? Where have I been crushed? Where have I been failed? Because as a self-producing musician or journalist, I always want to be putting, self-promoting and putting my good foot forward. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to show all the things where but those are the places where I learned, just like Malcolm Gladwell. And those things are maybe turned into advantage or maybe not. And so I tell that story because I was driving in my car and I just got this bunch of CDs by Scott Joplin, Jelly Roll Morton, that were recorded in 1923 through 1939. And as I'm listening to these things, I go, all of a sudden it hits me. Where did I first hear this? I first heard this at a Shakey's Pizza Parlor in Central Missouri when I was 10 years old at a player piano, and so that took me back, and I realized, oh, that was when I first encountered this music that I love so much now, but at that time, it was totally foreign and strange to me and intriguing, and so this whole thing about sidestepping the self, finding things that you go back to when you didn't know what you know now, and why, how did that journey go from things that you're so close to now and you take for granted? When were they foreign? When were they new to you? And I think that all the exercises in the book are helping me kind of rediscover where I was when I'm not who I am now, and how did I get there? Does that make sense?
And his homework for the week is to go to Shakey's Pizza.
There's one in
They
Reddit.
still exist.
Don't have that here.
No.
And have Jelly Roll Morton on his iPod.
No.
And the title of the book that Mary San wrote is called Looking Like the Enemy. And I think they have it here. It's about her years in the internment camp.